On behalf of the George W. Bush Institute and our Central America Prosperity Project, welcome to our virtual presentation of a digital strategy for competitiveness and integration in the Northern Triangle. The George W. Bush Institute is a nonpartisan, nonprofit think and do tank located on the campus of Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. Our mission is to engage communities in the United States and around the world by developing leaders and advancing policy and taking action to solve today's most pressing challenges. One of these pressing challenges is surely the long-term crisis of prosperity and security in Central America, particularly El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, which is currently driving so much of the irregular migration we are seeing along the southwestern border of the United States. The Bush Institute launched our Central America Prosperity Project in 2018, inviting a group of thought leaders of varying personal, professional, and political backgrounds, both experienced and proven leaders, as well as younger leaders with their fresh perspective. We asked that group to think together about how the economies of their countries could find their way to a more robust economic growth and broader prosperity. The group identified broader use of mobile digital technologies as a keystone reform that would enable Central American enterprises to better access global markets and at the same time curtail corruption and informality by making access to government and financial services less burdensome and more transparent. Working with the CAPP network, as well as numerous outside experts, the Bush Institute developed the digital reform agenda that we are presenting today. We are delighted today to be joined by two members of the United States Congress, Representative Henry Cuellar, a Democrat, and Representative Will Hurd, a Republican, both from the border region of Texas, for a moderated conversation. Following our conversation with the Congressmen, we will present our proposed digital agenda in greater detail, and then a group of our CAPP partners will join us for a panel discussion of the agenda and the future. But first, I would like to introduce the moderator of our conversation with the Congressman, Holly Kuzmich. Holly is Senior Vice President of the George W. Bush Presidential Center and Executive Director of the Bush Institute. Holly served in the White House and at the Department of Education during the Bush administration and is a widely recognized expert on education policy. Holly, thank you so much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Matt, and great work on this initiative. Congressman Hurd, Congressman Cuellar, thank you both for being with us today. We really appreciate having two members of the Texas delegation join us today. Just a bit of background on you both. Congressman Cuellar is from the 28th District of Texas. He was first elected to Congress in 2005, is serving in his 8th term. Prior to that, he was in the Texas House of Representatives. He's been an educator, a lawyer, a small business owner. Congressman Cuellar, thanks for being with us today. And Congressman Will Hurd is from the 23rd District of Texas, resides in San Antonio. He's serving his 3rd term. He was elected in 2015. Unfortunately, he's not seeking re-election in 2020, but we can't wait to see what's in store for you after that. And you previously served in the CIA and have such an interesting background as we think about issues regarding Central America. So let's kick it off with you both. Congressman Cuellar, I'm going to start. It's the same question for both of you, but I'm going to start with you first. And you both can unmute your microphones. You both have districts where parts of them sit along the US-Mexico border. And we're curious to know how the communities in your districts have reacted over the past several years to the arrival of masses of Central American migrants. What do you hear from them? What do they think about this? What do they say about this? Congressman Cuellar?
Well, you know, certainly people in my area are concerned about the treatment of immigrants coming in from South America, Central America, and Mexico. As you know, the profile of the individual coming in has changed. Some years ago, the people coming in were single, were male, were from Mexico. Now, well, maybe a change in the last few months, but recently it was more family members coming in. It was unaccompanied kids coming in, and they were coming in from Central America, even though lately we've seen a spike of people coming in from Mexico. So the profile has changed from single individuals coming in to work, male, to now family members coming in. I remember when this started, the unaccompanied kids coming in from Central America, 2014, it was interesting how the Obama administration was handling this. It was very quiet till one of my Border Patrol friends said, "Hey, do you know what's happening in your district?" I said, "No." He says, "Come with me to come visit the bus stations, and let me send you some pictures." I got those pictures and I released them, and that kind of just opened up the story we've been talking about since 2014, because the Obama administration was trying to keep it very low key. The Trump administration is trying to let everybody know that they're trying to stop people from coming in. So we've seen this in different ways. At first, we really didn't know what was going on. Now we know what we've seen. So people want to see, and I actually just got back yesterday. I told Will I was going to go into his district to see the facility in Pearsall where they got family units. And then the Pearsall, that was in Dilley, I'm sorry. And then Pearsall has mainly male adults from there. So, people want to see people get treated fairly. But at the same time, they want to make sure that we address the root issues in Central America. That's why back in 2014, 2015, K Ranger and myself, we added the first $750 million for the Central America initiative to make sure we address the root issues that we have.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Congressman Hurd, what do you hear from your constituents?
Sure. And Holly, I don't mean to correct our moderator up front, but you failed to mention in Henry Cuellar's opening that he is probably everybody's favorite member of Congress. So I just wanted to add that on before I began with my remarks. And look, I have 820 miles of the border, more border than any other member of Congress. It takes 10 and a half hours to drive across my district. And here's what people have been saying over the years: secure our border, take care of people humanely that are here, but address the root causes, as Henry talked about. And securing the border means making sure that they have the right tools to solve this problem. And literally up until probably 2 or 3 years ago, you had technology on the border that was 20 years old. And you required a PhD in computer science in order to use. Oh, and by the way, it wasn't actually on the border. So let's make sure we're using those tools. Let's increase intelligence on some of these issues. Then it's, if people are in our custody, let's treat them right. You shouldn't be putting kids in cages, right? That's not something that is within our values. So don't do that. But address those root causes, which is violence and lack of economic opportunity in some of our partner and allies in Central America. And how do we do that? We should be putting resources towards that problem. We also, what we've learned recently is the folks that are coming in here through buses and things like that, they're not hiding in caves like Al-Qaeda was in Afghanistan. We should be collecting some of this intelligence, working with our partners to solve this issue. I would also say that what we're hearing right now is that under the Lopez Obrador administration within Mexico, some of the cooperation when it comes to border security is the best it's been in a really long time. In some parts of my district, people are talking about unprecedented level of cooperation. So that's what they're saying, but they also want to see some solutions in how do we strengthen our alliances with our allies in Central America. How do we make sure we're creating opportunities? And that's why I think the program y'all are doing through CAPP, Holly and Matthew, is great, and especially focusing on the digital economy. And how do we make sure that we unlock this potential? And I don't want to, I got to see an advanced copy of the program, so I don't want to give it up if y'all are going to talk about it next. But some of the areas that y'all stress is really an opportunity to move forward in a tectonic way. And I'm glad y'all there at the Bush Institute are doing this.
Well, thank you. So let me ask you all both talked about, your constituents talking about addressing root causes. So let's spend a few minutes talking about that. What do what do your constituents say about those root causes? What are they seeing? And what's your own perspective on that in terms of what those root causes are that we really need to be tackling in Central America? And this time we'll start with Congressman Hurd, and then we'll go to you, Congressman Cuellar.
The root causes is violence, lack of economic opportunity, and extreme poverty. The violence issue is oftentimes driven by a lack of trust in the police. And we have seen programs through State Department and USAID that has helped local communities within the Northern Triangle get rid of the police, retrain them in community policing, which is becoming, we're being reminded of the importance of community policing here in the United States of America following George Floyd. And guess what? When those programs were put in place, you saw violence decrease. You saw folks leaving those parts of those countries to come into the United States illegally decrease. So addressing that issue, and that's why reducing federal support or dollars from the U.S. government to our friends in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras is a bad move. We should be replicating these programs that are actually working. So that's one way you can address the violence issue. But also, look, I'm a classically trained intelligence officer. I look at how do you dismantle networks. We should be sharing a little bit more information, working closer with our Mexican allies on this problem. 1, 2, how do you create these economic opportunities for folks to reason to stay there? And I think part of it is our friends need to be looking together. I think an area that Henry and I spend a lot of time talking on is energy and making sure that we're leaders in this. If we can make sure that it's easy to sell natural gas across those borders, then guess what? We're going to be able to make it cheaper for people to turn on their lights. And you know what happens when it's cheaper to turn on your light? You're on your lights, the quality of life increases as well. So how do you dismantle some of those barriers amongst our ally nations for that free flow of information and free flow of data, right? If we're talking about how do we build economies of the future. Another thing that I would like to see happen is, and don't make the same mistakes we made here in the United States. When there is construction projects in Central America, dig once. Make sure you're putting fiber optic cable in. Make sure you're putting the infrastructure in place to be able to take advantage of it when that time comes. And this is something we've learned the hard way in the U.S. and something that both Henry and I are trying to fix. So I think making sure the infrastructure is there to take advantage of a digital economy is another way to address that root cause of lack of economic opportunity.
Yeah. Congressman Cuellar, what do you have to add to this conversation on addressing these causes?
Well, certainly, I think Will articulated this in the right way. I mean, he's absolutely right about the cost issues. He's been down there in Central America, like I've been in Central America several times. Usually when you hear some of the advocates in the U.S., they will say that it's violence, 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 violence. That is the root issue, but there are economics, and there's been, I think USAID did a study on some of the countries down there, and a lot of times it's economics. Sometimes it's a drought. They might get hit by a drought in the rural area, so they can't farm, so they start looking for jobs. Some of it's driven by the bad guys. They found. I'll call it a loophole. As you know, if an individual comes in, an adult, he is usually picked up by Border Patrol, held by ICE, and depending if he doesn't have a criminal record, he'll be sent. If it's a unaccompanied child, that person will go to Border Patrol, then go to Health and Human Services, nonprofits, and then they will be released to a family member or a sponsor. Then the third one is where the bad guys started looking at, hey, you know what? If you are an adult and you bring a child, there's been cases of rent a child and how they recycle some of the children coming over. If you bring a child, guess what? They're going to get you and they're going to release you. Now, I know in the last few months, a lot of those things have been changed under President Trump, but that was the loophole. So what the bad guys started doing, they started literally advertising, social media, etc., saying, hey, we can get you over to the U.S. And bring a child and you'll get in. And for a while, that's what was happening, because if you were an adult, you would go into ICE facility. If you were a child, Health and Human Services, and then released to a sponsor. If you're a family member, in the past, they would get you and send you to a bus station, and then somebody would get you a bus ticket, and then you could go with a permiso, show up anywhere in the U.S. So the drivers or the factors for coming in are varied in nature, even though some people think that it's only violence, violence, violence. Sometimes it's more the economic for jobs. Sometimes it's a driver because somebody wants to make money. And you can calculate if you're charging $6,000 or plus per person and look at the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, you can see how much money the bad guys were doing. Sometimes they were making more on human misery than on drugs themselves itself. So one of the things that those countries want is, yes, the aid that we've given them, the appropriations that, Will Hurd and myself have worked on, USAID, that's important, but they want to have OPEC, for example. They want to have investments down there. They want to see trade down there so they can create the jobs. More jobs you create there, less people will be coming here. Now, we saw what happened in the 1980s. We started losing attention, focus on Central America. The Sandinistas came in, we sent them all over north, and we saw what happened. We woke up and said, oh, we got to send them orange, we got to send them all over north. Same thing's happening now. If we don't pay attention to Latin America, and I'm talking about not only Central, Mexico, and South America, 40% of everything we export as a country goes to Latin America, according to the U.S. Chamber, but we don't pay 40% of our attention to Latin America, especially Central America. If we don't pay attention to them, we see the Russians in Nicaragua. We know what's happened in Venezuela, but there is a map that I think both Will and I have seen that has a place where the Russians, especially the Chinese are all over the place, literally all over the place. And at Salvador, before the new president came in, they wanted to buy, I don't know if it was leased for 99 years or wanted to buy about 70% of all the coastline of El Salvador. China wanted to come in. So we have to be careful as a country, because if we don't pay attention to them and get involved, like Will is saying, we're going to wake up like in the 1980s and say, oh my God, look what's happening in our own backyard on that. The Chinese are named the country in Central America, and they are there.
So
Holly, can I jump in on something Henry said? There's been a lot of talk about all of these multilateral institutions over the last couple of years. And I talk about NATO a lot. Why does NATO matter? Because it helped have 70 years of peace and prosperity in Europe. 70 years of peace and prosperity in Europe created one of the greatest and most important trading partners for the United States of America that helped the U.S. grow our economy, have trading partners. And as Henry says, if we forget about our own neighbors and we don't spend a level of time, energy, and effort on this, then we're missing out on an opportunity to help the quality of life of U.S. citizens. And that's what Henry and I are trying to do every day. But it's an opportunity to do this with some allies in our backyard, and how we strengthen those, because guess what? Some of the folks that are not our friends are looking to take advantage of that vacuum.
And what's the mood among the policymaking in DC on these issues related to Central America that you've highlighted? You two have deep knowledge of this, given who you represent and where you represent. Sort of how much understanding of this and our role and relationship with Central America is there among the policymaking community in Washington?
There are people like Will Hurd, myself, Kay Ranger, other folks that understand the importance of Central America. But I think most members, with all due respect, using football as an analogy, will always use the 1 yard line or the goalpost or the goal line as where they should put all the emphasis. That is the U.S. Mexico border, put a wall, stop people there, et cetera, et cetera. But if you play football, wouldn't you like to play defense on their 20-yard line instead of our 1-yard line called the U.S.-Mexico border, where we spend billions of dollars? Don't get me started on the wall, and you'll see a wasteful amount of money, billions of dollars, where that could be helpful to, build roads, build ports. Some of the socio-economic programs are so important that will stop, those drivers, why people come over to here, to the U.S. Unfortunately, there's only a few of us that understand the importance of this. As an example, I'll give you back when I first started as a freshman, CAPP. CAPP, was important for, Central America and the DR and all that. But a lot of my Democrat friends fought it, and I just couldn't understand. I said, don't we want to make those friends stronger and engage them? Because if we don't engage them, like Will said, somebody else is going to engage them. Right. So the problem is, when people think about Latin America, they don't see the 40% that we export as a country. They see challenges, and they don't see opportunities. And again, it's not only, like I said, it's not only U.S. AID or funding that we provide in appropriations, the Central American strategy, but it's also private investments. Companies need to go down there. This thing going on with China, instead of having a company in China, maybe we ought to be looking at Mexico, Central America to produce something. I'd rather have a company in the U.S., but if they're going to be somewhere else, and this is something we've been, Will, if you recall, when we talked to some of the when we talked to those 5 Mexican governors recently, that's one thing they were saying, hey, we want to see more of that investments here. So whether it's Mexico, Central America, we need to pay more attention and stop thinking that Latin America is at the U.S. border, the 1-yard line, and have it extend a lot further itself.
Henry is right, Holly. Most of our colleagues, look, I think people have a lack of understanding of Mexico, and they're our neighbor, right? I have to remind folks that there are more Michelin star restaurants in Mexico City than there are in New York or Paris, right? And so, look, I'll even take my example. I've lived in some pretty dangerous places. I was in Afghanistan, Pakistan. I've traveled in places I probably shouldn't have been. And, before I went to El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras, my understanding was, in my head, I was thinking it was going to be Mogadishu from Black Hawk Down days. And it's really not the case, right? I've had some amazing pupusas on cafes, on the street, wonderful time. And so there's a basic lack of understanding and appreciation of our neighbors. And so with that lack of understanding, that breeds fear. And and that is what drives people to say, hey, this is a problem, and we have to defend it. And it's like, look, if you're waiting to the 1-yard line, as Henry says, the game's over, right? And so we should be thinking of the opportunity. But unfortunately, most of the time, and we're at a time in our politics in the U.S. where everything's about contrast rather than and fear, rather than looking at the opportunity. And the only way to change that is by some of the projects that y'all are working on to show the upside. What is the opportunity? It's the great panelists that are on the second panel today coming to Washington, D.C. and educating members. It's having organizations that are taking members of Congress to go visit these places and to really understand it and see what's happening. And so that's the only way that we're going to improve understanding. And it takes time, it takes commitment, and it takes effort. And so we will be able to get there. And because look, I say the only way we're going to solve big problems is by doing it together. And that goes for us here in the United States, but also with our regional partners.
So you teed up this last question perfectly for both of you, which is really oriented towards the Central American leaders themselves. Is they engaged with American policymakers on the region overall and why American engagement is important, and specifically on reforms related to the work we're doing as part of the Central American Prosperity Project on digital technologies and, you know, the informal economy. What advice do you have for them in terms of how they engage with American policymakers and also push needed reforms in their own countries?
I'll start so Henry can wrap us up and bring us home. But it starts with, you have to have the conversation on the security piece first, right? It is making the case on what's being done to address that violence issue, to address some of those groups that are, you know, whether it's human traffickers or transnational criminal organizations. That effort there, and then creating transparency within their own government, like those that has to be the lead, because if you don't have that political stability and address those issues, it's going to be hard to have this the economic pressure, and that's what's on people's minds. Most of our colleagues, especially on my side of the aisle. So you have to lead with the reforms to that before we get to the opportunities, because that's the question that's going to be in people's heads.
Perfect. Thank you. Congressman Cuellar.
Yeah, you know, following up what Will said, listen, you know, the last time I was there, Will, I think you were with us when we went to Central America. We talked to some of the leaders, and we've spent time with them, not only in Central America. And I know I've, you know, for example, let me give you an example. The president of Honduras, Juan Hernandez, I spent a lot of time because we worked with them on doing the South America strategy back in 2014, 2015. We spent a lot of time with them, but then as that money was appropriated, that money was being held up. And I understand we put a lot of criteria on him. It got to a point where every time he would come in and meet with the president, he would meet, you know, I would have a one-to-one breakfast with him. And he says, you know, Henry, it's getting very frustrating working with you Americans. You know, every time we try to work with this, you know, you think we're bad. You think we're this. You always see the negative in us. And there's some of us are trying to do the right thing. Same thing with the new president of El Salvador. He says, hey, we're getting a lot of pressure from the Chinese because the prior administration wanted to sell or lease 70% of all the coastline of El Salvador. He says, but we need your backing in it. You guys are moving too slow. And at that time, I think President Trump wanted to cut the funding. I had to put in the appropriation a spend plan because they were holding up over $800 million that had been already appropriated, but were just held there. $800 million, almost $1 billion, could have done a lot to help Central America, but it was being held up by the bureaucracy in the State Department. So the issue is, you got some of those leaders that want to work with us. Are they perfect? No, of course, there's issues like anything else, but in talking to them, they always see us as seeing negatives and negatives and negatives and negatives. And they want to work with us, but they said, man, you just see us as bad guys every single time. You talk to us and you put all this criteria on us and all this. And I know there's corruption issues. I understand all that. But, there's ways that we can work with them. The other thing, just yesterday, as I mentioned, I was in the Pearsall facility. And yesterday they had people from 53 countries. And at a high point, they had people from about 75 countries. So what we're seeing people, first it was Mexicans, then it was Mexicans and Central Americans. And now we're seeing people from all over the world that are coming in through Central America, Mexico, and coming to the US. We can work with them. To not play defense on the 1 yard line. We can work with them, and they want to work with us, but we just are not spending the time and the resources where it'll benefit them for their security, and it will benefit us for our security. So bottom line is, they just feel that, working with the Americans are very, very hard. And how do the Russians or the Chinese say, hey, you want a road? Here's this money here. And of course, sometimes that's a loan and they catch them in a debt trap, but they work very fast. You know, the Russians in Nicaragua, hey, you need some weapons. Hey, you need a port here. Or you know what, we'll build a hospital so you can do this. And they work a lot faster. And for us, we, you know, because of our system, it's got to be a way that we can be a little bit more efficient, more careful with the taxpayers' dollars, but don't let the Chinese and the Russians always beat us, and especially when it comes to our own backyard. You know, I like to share this, and Will, I think you've seen this. I have to show you this map from Mexico all the way to the tip of Argentina, Chile, where you see the Russians, but it's mainly the Chinese and where they're at and the type of projects they're doing. They are in our own backyard, including Central America.
Yeah. Well, Congressman, thank you both for taking time out of your day. Thank you for supporting the work we do here at the Bush Institute. We look forward to continuing to engage with you on this, and I will turn it back to my colleagues for the second part of this conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you, Congressman Cuellar and Congressman Hurd, for your participation today. I know I speak for all of our Central American friends and colleagues when I say how grateful we are for your interest and support for our project, and how much we look forward to working with you and your colleagues in the future. And thank you, Holly, for your help today, and especially for your support for the CAPP project since its very beginnings. You've been a very strong supporter and a very strong, a great deal of assistance, and I'm grateful. Now I'd like to invite my colleague, Jenny Villatoro, to present our proposed digital strategy in a little more detail. Jenny, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We at the Bush Institute are excited to briefly walk you through our policy paper titled A Digital Strategy for Competitiveness and Integration in the Northern Triangle. As Matt alluded to earlier, in 2018, we launched the Central America Prosperity Project, which we affectionately shortened to CAPP, to develop action-oriented strategies for achieving inclusive growth by leveraging the advantages of regional economic integration. With strong support from our CAPP Leadership Network, we identified the implementation of modern regional and national digital strategies as an urgent priority for the Northern Triangle. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, digital transformation represented a strong opportunity for the region. But now, in the middle of the pandemic, as nations look forward to reopening into economic recovery, we can see in real time how access, connectivity, and digital technologies are important for overcoming the economic setbacks caused by COVID-19. The Bush Institute is focused on assisting CAPP civil society leaders in partnership with their governments to promote the following 5 recommendations to drive forward a digital strategy in the Northern Triangle to benefit all governments, citizens, and entrepreneurs of the Northern Triangle. Our first recommendation is for each of the 3 countries to establish a comprehensive digital governance framework. In the wake of COVID-19 and the need for new ways of working and connecting, digital strategies and implementations are moving quickly. A solid regulatory framework is critical in order for these to be successful. Indeed, digital regulations create a framework by which private stakeholders either do or don't feel confident investing, innovating, and operating within. We know that uncertainty is detrimental to businesses and to attracting investments. The region's societies and economies are already highly connected, such that a collaborative approach resulting in interoperability throughout the region would attract higher investment into digital technology and strengthen the resiliency of digital systems. We include a bulleted list of principles, objectives, and actions that should be included in the region's governance framework, and we invite you to check those out at bushcenter.org. 2 of those that are essential pillars that I'd like to briefly highlight are data privacy and cross-border data transfer. Those are both necessary for digital economic activity and innovation to thrive. A clear commitment by each of the governments to implement a unified strategy and compatible regulations would give greater confidence to small and medium enterprises in particular, but to all businesses to invest in digital capabilities and online business models. Our second recommendation is to expand key e-government services to increase access and reduce corruption. E-government could streamline workflows within government agencies, saving both time and money, expand citizens' access to public services, and promote transparency, which reduces the incidence of corruption, all while promoting improved compliance with tax and labor laws. All of the Northern Tribal governments have each launched e-government initiatives, which provide a solid foundation for broader national strategies, which will ultimately strengthen institutions along with citizens' trust in those institutions. Here we also provide a bulleted list of priorities that I encourage you to check out at bushcenter.org. Overall, expanding e-government services will create important efficiencies while reducing labor informality and corruption, two of the region's main barriers to development. Our third recommendation is to improve broadband and spectrum allocation by collaborating with supporting partners. Connectivity gaps in the region require urgent attention. While the world's advanced economies race to roll out 5G, just 35% of Central America's population has 4G coverage. While 4G coverage is low, mobile cell use is high. This offers a unique and important opportunity to expand connectivity using mobile broadband. Increased connectivity can produce productivity across a range of sectors from agriculture to healthcare, and there are many important initiatives underway by the World Bank, the IDB, the UN, MCC, and many more supporting partners, including the US government. And we recommend that each country work with these partners and others to evaluate approaches to more efficient broadband and spectrum allocation. This includes setting measurable goals and specific targets for metrics such as broadband speed and subscriptions, and a share of citizens with access to mobile banking, just to name a few examples. The US government is an important supporting player for governments that commit to such targets and is invested in the region for a myriad of reasons and through a variety of initiatives, such as the US National Cyber Strategy. Our fourth recommendation is for the region to foster high-tech ecosystems. Economies with extensive high-tech sectors enjoy world-class talent and capital and offer employees good salaries and advancement opportunities. Governments and the private sector can support the creation of high-tech hubs where accessibility to high-speed internet is assured, where startups can work with academia and mentors, and where tech innovators can connect with traditional industries like textiles and agriculture to help integrate digital technologies into their business models. And as small businesses employ the bulk of the region's workforce, we recommend a focus on helping small businesses adopt digital technologies on a wider basis. Our fifth recommendation is for the region to invest in a digital-ready workforce. Governments, higher education, the private sector, and NGOs should focus on incorporating digital literacy, data science, and cybersecurity into public education. A successful strategy will leverage a key strength of the Northern Triangle countries, their young populations, who are very familiar with smartphones, computers, and technologies, who are entering their prime working years, and who often offer bilingual capabilities. Offering this segment of the population new opportunities in a stronger high-tech sector holds potential to reduce outmigration from the Northern Triangle by strengthening participation in a growing economy at home. The Bush Institute and CAPP leaders believe that the Northern Triangle has a tremendous opportunity to address some of its most pressing challenges through digitalization and technology. Regional coordination is needed to leverage this opportunity, and we stand ready to work with change makers inside and outside the region to advance these priorities. COVID-19 has created a situation, and not only has public health been jeopardized, but millions have lost their job. The future and well-being of citizens and companies in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, we urge these governments to work together to implement a digital strategy for competitiveness and integration in the Northern Triangle. We are so grateful to our CAPP leaders and to you, our friends and partners, for your support and for being with us virtually today. With that, I will turn it over to Matt to introduce our next segment.
Thank you, Jenny, for those additional details, but mostly for your very hard work and commitment to this project over the past 2 years. Now we'll hear from a panel, including Miguel Ángel Simán, President of FUSADES of El Salvador, Guillermo Peña Pante, President of Fundación Eleutera of Honduras, and Juan Carlos Zapata, Executive Director of Fundesa of Guatemala. FUSADES, Eleutera, and Fundesa are all leading think and do tanks in their countries, and all have been very strong partners in the CAPP initiative. Gentlemen, I'm grateful for your support and commitment over these past 2 years. Our panel will be moderated by Claudia Umaña, Vice President of FUSADES, who has been a supporter and invaluable source of advice for CAPP since I first approached her almost 3 years ago to discuss the Bush Institute's desire to find a way to support more robust growth in the Central American region. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Matt. for that kind remark, and also for organizing, for the whole Bush Institute organizing this event. And thank you, Congressman, for your insights and hard work to support the Central American region and to promote a compelling case for robust American engagement with the region, addressing the root causes that are the push factors for migration and promoting transparency and good governance as key elements. Well, as you can see, we've been working for the past 2 years with the Bush Institute because they convened a very interesting group of leaders from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras that have constituted the Central American Prosperity Project. We have been working to develop an action-oriented strategy for inclusive growth by leveraging the advantage of regional economic integration in the Northern Triangle. I'd like to ask each of the panelists to talk about how their experiences with the project came to be, how did this group was able to focus on digitization, and what is the state of the digital economy in their countries. Congressmen Hurd and Cuellar spoke about the US continued commitment to the region. How have the American programs contributed to the digitization in the region? So I would like to give the first opportunity to anyone that want to take it, because we are going to have this general question, and then I'll come back with two other questions. So Miguel Angel.
Thank you, Claudia, Matt, and everyone at the Bush Institute for this opportunity. With regards to your questions, we certainly decided to focus on digital transformation, as it was clear that our economies were not growing at a rate that could generate enough income opportunities for all, reduce poverty levels, and stop migration. As you know, it has been for many years now a loss of some of the best and most talented workers. Additionally, we have seen a significant expansion over these years of our government without improving the delivery of public services, but creating an excessive bureaucracy that is suffocating small businesses in their capacity to compete. Not surprisingly, the informal sector represents now more than 70% of our economic activity. So the question was, how do we achieve inclusive growth? And so we are very thankful to the Bush Institute for convening a diverse group of leaders and for organizing this project from which the digital strategy came up. We believe that the digital economy can transform our capacity to connect and compete globally, foster economic growth and jobs, and at the same time provide better opportunities in education, healthcare, and other social services. In regards to the state of our digital economy, I regret to say that we're still behind. According to the World Economic Forum, in the last decade, El Salvador has gone down 33 places in the list, from 67th to 100 among 140 countries. That's because only 1/3 of the population has access to internet, and less than 50% of households have some kind of computer or iPad at home. Among government employees, 25% lack a computer at work. And more discouraging is the level of digital illiteracy that you can find among public workers. Also, our digital infrastructure has limited broadband capacity and speed. And it's important to point out that we're still behind in digital governance and laws that facilitate e-commerce and protect investors and the privacy of users. So as you can imagine, the low levels of digitization is reflected in low levels of productivity and excessive bureaucracy in El Salvador. With regards to your questions about the US support, let me just add that over the years, the US has supported our region through the cooperation agencies. The Millennium Challenge Corporation has also played an important role helping us improve regulations and advancing the law on electronic signature. We thank the US for its support, as we have much ground still to cover. In that spirit, I believe the US should strongly support our efforts on digital transformation, which in turn improves efficiency and transparency, because the US can help us ensure the long-term continuity of a digital strategy, given the changes we have in administrations every 4 or 5 years. And definitely, in this process, we need the US asserting all governments to respect the rule of law, which allows the right environment for a digital transformation in the region.
Thank you very much. And I would like to hear the Honduran perspective, Guillermo.
Thank you, Claudia. Well, for Fundación Eleuthera, it's been a great honor to work with Fundesa, FUSAIS, and especially with the George W. Bush Institute on this CAPP project, which has been extremely fulfilling for us in order to provide this cross of information between the region and with our most important commercial partner, which is the US. We at Fundación Eleuthera, we've been mainly focused on policy work that helps to provide and improve social mobility. And in social mobility, that has brought us to work in very particular areas, including energy markets, regulatory reform in areas such as labor, contracts, and energy as well. And the third part has been e-government, which we had begun working on this before we were invited to the CAPP project, but once it came up, we were able to move a lot faster and to provide more information to the counterparts in the local administration here. As that strength was gained in the local push, we were able to continue looking for the next opportunity or the next problems. In particular is that as we move to a digital economy and to a digital government system, the infrastructure is the base, and not only the physical infrastructure, but the regulatory infrastructure is the key for this functioning properly, in particular to one of the elements that Jose Miguel Angel just mentioned, which is the concentration of power and the way the authority can use this information for themselves. We believe at Fundación Eleuthera that the cybersecurity effort and data privacy need to be a top of the list effort in which the US can provide us with some knowledge and support in which that framework should be implemented properly, as we see that the world has sort of broken up in 3 main schools of thought for data privacy, and that's the US on one side, the European factor led by the European Union, and then the Chinese way of looking at it right now. So as that global discussion happens, we are sure that the Northern Triangle should be sticking to a regional policy that allows the data flows and protects the information from its citizens. So this project is extremely important for us. I think that working together across border is key, because as we know, digital economy gets way past beyond our borders and does not end where our borders end. Just like globalization, the digital economy just ties it up even more together to the rest of the world. And we have to have a policy system that allows for the proper work and the protection, not only for the citizens now, but also between governments, and that data protection will be the key to allow us to move forward with this digitalization process and the e-government process.
Thank you, Guillermo. Juan Carlos?
Thank you very much. I would like to first give many thanks to the Bush Institute and all Matt and his team, as well as our colleagues in FUSAIS and Fundación Eleuthera. When we talk about the CAPP project, the first thing that pops into my mind is that it has been a great support for our countries and has helped us prioritize from different sectors of society the importance of a digital agenda, especially for the countries of the Northern Triangle and Central America. Even though our organizations already had different agendas and were working on different projects, the CAPP project has definitely brought up the issue in a transversal manner, which positively affects several of the different pillars of the competitiveness in our countries. The ability of the Bush Institute to convey experienced Central American leaders with the emergent generations of leaders from the three countries has been a powerful experience, combining different ways of thinking so that each of the contributions has focused on development goals, but also the document presented today certainly conveys the message of a common agenda towards a digital future that we all can work together now to achieve. The group focused on digitization. From the first meeting in Dallas, there was a clear vision that there were enough organizations working on issues like education, health, security, infrastructure, and fighting against corruption, all extreme important topics for development. However, the digital agenda was sometimes, we knew it was important for development, but it had not been discussed as a topic that could impact the region. This was one of the most important decisions after several hours of discussion and in-depth analysis from different perspectives on the importance of having a digital agenda based on 4 key issues: the legal framework, the digital government services, how to increase connectivity infrastructure, and accelerate the ecosystems of technology. Now, within the case of Guatemala, there is an important gap. According to the 2019 digital report published by Hotsuit, there's a penetration of only 45% of the population that uses internet, and only 43% has access to social networks through their phones. The average connection is 16 megabytes on cell phones and only 9 megabytes on residential internet. However, when you look at the population that has access to credit card, it's only 6.6% of the population, and only 7.6% pay their bills online. This has created a great opportunity to increase the use of digital media, especially in intermediate cities, as government, as well as within government agencies, to facilitate a process and increase e-commerce as well as digital system throughout the country. When we talk about how American programs have contributed to digitization in the region, there are many programs that focus on technical capacity and technical training, but none of them address the connectivity problem. We are working directly with USDFC, the Development Bank of the US, to leverage more investment on capital expenditure within the IT sector, working together with mayors along different parts of the country in intermediate cities to lower the cost of investment of introducing new DSL infrastructure, specifically, as both congressmen said, how to increase the infrastructure that will be needed in order to connect more people within these cities.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. And on that note, I would like to ask Guillermo something. One of our initiatives was the recommendation in a sustained public education campaign to ensure that people are ready and able to use digital services responsibly. What is your sense on the receptivity of the public in Honduras regarding this matter?
Well, I'd start with the receptivity starts with trust, and we have a very big trust problem, and I would say that crosses borders, but definitely speaking for Honduras, the trust in the population that a government can properly execute a digital agenda is doubted because of the many efforts that have come along the way that have just been very slow. In this case, we have recently passed a framework that completes the digital economy process and the digital government process in particular, going through a more profound reform that was needed for the digital signature and to force the different government agencies to comply with this effort, as well as the legal industry within Honduras to comply with this effort. When we see the educational effort, we know that you have to break it up because the country is very different within. So there's a different angle to educate and to bring on board the population that lives in the two main larger cities than it is from the rural areas, where there's a higher problem with electricity and internet. But then we also have to separate the conversation between e-government, agility, and trust versus the known and traditional ways of doing things. So that conversation has to be worked within these angles, and it has to be a permanent conversation that should not only be led or left to government to create this trust, because it is part of civil society to have a direct role, as well as the private sector organizations directly, to be able to bring the trust and say, yes, we will use these mechanisms as they start being deployed. Although we do have a basic framework, and history has shown us in the region that execution can sometimes be more difficult than the policy effort, although we celebrate the policy effort as a whole because we think that's the first long step. But then execution comes in ways that we just get stuck, or a government transition occurs, and then the change of plans within administrations sometimes becomes so personal for each administration that they get dropped off by the next one. In this effort, we have to make sure that the digital economy, the digital effort, and the e-government process become detached from the personalized government or the current authority, and be placed as a general national interest process that has a long-term effect and needs to be long-term for it to produce the fruits that we expect as a population.
Being a public-private matter, Juan Carlos, to what extent can we expect the private sector to invest in broadening the use of the digital services? Is the government in Guatemala involved, and is it ready to fund, to lay the groundwork?
Thank you, Claudia. Definitely the government is investing, although we also consider that the private sector will also invest to the extent that adequate incentives are generated to increase urbanization in the country. Guatemala is one of the least urbanized countries in Latin America. Only 56% of people live in cities, a percentage that in other countries, specifically on South America, has reached already more than 90%. This is limiting the introduction of new connectivity and broadband systems, especially on fiber optic cables in various parts of the country, which should change as we urbanize and generate the necessary infrastructure for connectivity. Over the past 8 years, more than $95.6 million of foreign direct investment has gone into IT sectors and digital services. Within Fundesa, we're working closely with the National Competitiveness Program, as well as the Foreign Relations Ministry, to increase the coordination of new investment, prioritizing sectors such as manufacturing as well as IT services to increase digitization. One opportunity that COVID-19 has brought to the region is the disruption of global chains in Asia that is generating opportunities for our countries to attract manufacturing systems that want to nearshore and that will need to invest in high-tech, specifically on high-tech fabrics, which is becoming a big selling point for different brands in order to be more competitive. This paves the way to comfortable high-tech clothes within, for example, convert sunlight to warmth, supply wearable electronic devices with electricity, or fitness training that can contain sensors so that athletes can be more comfortable. And this is definitely an opportunity for competitiveness for the region and specifically for Guatemala.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And talking about a regional view, Miguel Angel, our recommendations encourage for our countries to work together so that the digital stovepipes don't emerge, which could absolutely impede the ongoing economic integration process in the region. How serious is that? How do we prevent the concern from slowing the whole proposal down?
Well, Claudia, there will always be concerns, but we're convinced that working together as a region is key in this process. In fact, one of the greatest challenges we have is to build commitment among stakeholders to implement and to consolidate a digital strategy. I'm sure the different legal frameworks in each country will pose additional challenges that will require some degree of adaptation, but we must never lose the spirit and the objectives of the regional approach that we're looking for. I'm sure there will also be special interest groups and sectors with specific demands. This can be country-specific or from common sectors across countries, so we must take them into account. Furthermore, there are differences in the financial capacity of each country, so it will be necessary to find creative ways to finance investments in digital infrastructure with the appropriate financial instruments and vehicles, such as national and why not regional public-private partnerships. Again, all of these challenges will require from all stakeholders to commit themselves to the initiative. And certainly, international partners such as the Bush Institute, development banks such as the IDB, cooperation agencies such as USAID and the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and many other international players must be involved in this process. They can certainly provide expertise and know-how. They can provide and share best practices, provide financial support, and help bridging differences, not only among sectors within our countries, but among the three countries themselves.
Thank you. So let me add one more thing. What are the prospects of achieving the key reforms that our strategy calls for in each of the countries? Especially, does the COVID-19 pandemic make the reforms easier to pass or even in a more complex situation? So Guillermo, I would like to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think with this COVID situation has been a huge economic and social and health problem for our populations, but it has given us, I think, on the bright side, as we should always look for in a crisis, is that the opportunity for a digital agenda or the reluctance to participate in it greatly diminished. Governments realized that bureaucratic efforts or bureaucratic customs were needed of a great change. And that's what, in our case, what allowed for, within the first month of our lockdown, to do some legislative reforms that allowed for this basic framework to move forward. That as well showed that there was many institutions that had no participation if they could not have face-to-face meetings or signing directly. And that allowed us to push forward. But I would like to say that our digital agenda for the region, at least in what involves the 4 countries that gather here, is that should be strongly pushed, thanks to COVID, on our customs union effort. As we already have a basic framework for that, but we should be able to get our governments and our private sector on board on a digital customs system for the region that would get both public and private working together, and in particular in the areas of logistics, production, tax collection, and compliance. And compliance brings in security as well, which is a big element of interest for the U.S. in the region.
Thank you, Guillermo. Juan Carlos, what is your vision on this issue?
Thank you, Claudia. It's definitely a great opportunity, especially in Congress, as we know that all three countries are struggling to pass different laws, just in the case of Guatemala, to put in place a comprehensive digital governance framework in terms of data privacy, data transfer across national borders, e-commerce, and e-signature, as well as cybersecurity laws and public access to government data. Now, COVID-19 has expanded key government services, especially in countries like Guatemala, like the electronic invoice, and now it's moving its tax filing system and collecting online, as the tax authorities have implemented new IT systems. Now, COVID-19 has also accelerated e-procurement opportunities and has the potential to increase broadband and spectrum allocation, as telework and social distance has made IT services now a necessary tool for many jobs. Finally, within Fundesa, we're working with different universities in the Western Highlands and cities like Quetzaltenango to foster high-tech ecosystems. As we all know, in Guatemala, Campus Tech is the largest privately funded initiative in Guatemala City. Now, this is an example and is now being replicated in other intermediate cities, bringing together SMEs, IT services, university, and other sectors to develop small business development centers around the orange economy that can not only foster creativity, but also increase the number of digital entrepreneurs that we can have in different parts of Guatemala.
Miguel Angel, so the effect of COVID on this matter.
Well, COVID brought challenges and opportunities. And in the case of El Salvador, perhaps some public officials were not convinced on the need for a faster digital transformation. But certainly COVID-19 has come to change that. COVID-19 has exposed important weaknesses in our capacity to act fast and effectively. In terms of the health system, for instance, we were never prepared. We don't even have a good database with medical files that can support the public healthcare system and improve coordination among hospitals and medical personnel. In terms of the educational system, COVID-19 took us by surprise without the capacity to hold classes online during the long quarantine. So public schools will miss about half of the academic year and its programs. Also, the lack of a good digital platform, its legal framework, and governance caught the private sector off guard. Retailers had not developed their system to support e-commerce. Manufacturers had not developed advanced systems to secure their supply chains. Agribusinesses had to face losing their perishable production. And many in the service sector were not ready to provide their services digitally. The public sector was also not ready to maintain many of its critical operations during COVID-19, customs for one. So the economic activity was hit even further by the incapacity of our public sector to operate digitally. I would argue then that all of these experiences during COVID-19 have certainly raised awareness about our weak links, and that as new emergencies and other interruptions may arise, we must be prepared with a digital platform that will allow to overcome any adversity. To do so, the first step is to have the will to do it, and we have it. So I think the time has come to move forward with the digital agenda in our region.
Thank you, Miguel Angel, Juan Carlos, and Guillermo for participating and sharing your views. It has been noted throughout all of these interventions that we have a tremendous opportunity to address some of the more pressing challenges through technology. Even though the countries have taken important steps to achieve the digital goals, more action and regional coordination are needed. COVID-19 has created a situation in which not only the livelihoods of many people have been jeopardized, but also millions of people around the globe have lost their jobs. For the future well-being of the citizens and companies in the Northern Triangle, it's important that governments work together to implement a digital strategy for competitiveness and integration to overcome the setbacks of COVID-19. We can still go in the path for prosperity and growth and a better livelihoods for all of our citizens. And we think that the Bush Institute and this strategy are elements that are essential for this new path. Thank you so much to each of the participants and also to the viewers of this interesting panel.
Thank you very much for your participation over these last 2 years, really, in this project. Your support and the support of your organizations has been really crucial. It's been a great pleasure working with you. And thanks to everyone watching this recording today. We're grateful to you for your interest. We regret that we were unable to webcast this event live and take audience questions, but we would welcome any comments or follow-up questions that you might have. Please feel free to visit our website at www.bushcenter.org and leave us a message. We're looking forward to working closely with all interested stakeholders in the United States and in the Central American region to promote broader use of digital technologies, which we believe will be transformational for the region's growth, prosperity, and security. And with that, this event is concluded. Thank you, everyone, for your participation.